Good afternoon, everyone. If it's okay with everyone, we're about to start. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Razan Khalifa Al Mubarak. I'm the UN High Level Champion for COP28 and President of IUCN. And it is truly a privilege to be surrounded by all of you, really in your own right, representing true leadership across the climate and nature agenda. I'm also honored to moderate this session on nature finance. Ladies and gentlemen, with the support of many of you in this room, COP28 delivered a clear call for the urgent need to work on nature and climate synergistically. It's been recognized now formally and through a negotiated process enshrined in the UAE consensus that climate and nature cannot be dealt with separately. Science has also shown that there is no 1.5-degree pathway with the phase out of fossil fuels alone. We need nature, and we need it now more than ever. Action on nature is not only cost effective, it can be delivered at scale where people, local communities, indigenous populations live, and it can enhance resilience. It is also a strategic lever that can provide up to a third of our mitigation requirements by 2030. And failure to finance nature will not only prevent us from achieving and reaching our climate goals, it will also prevent us from development pathways that the global south and emerging economies have a right for. It will prevent us from reaching our aspirations with respect to food security, and it will, ladies and gentlemen, dilute our identity and our culture, particularly those that live on the front line where nature lives and thrives. At COP16 in Colombia, the Cali Fund was agreed. And there is a growing momentum in the real economy. We have the FSDA with more than 30 financial institutions committing to stop commodity-driven deforestation in their portfolios. The TNFD, an organization and initiative that I proudly now co-chair, is finally also putting nature on the financial disclosure tables, with more than 500 companies committed to do so. The Tropical Forest Fund facility, launched by Brazil, is an innovative facility and approach to finally find investment opportunities to protect standing forests. The task force on credit enhancement is also showcasing innovative financial structures such as the $1 billion debt for nature swap that has been recently announced for El Salvador. All of this, ladies and gentlemen, underscore the transformative potential that is within our grasp. And that's why we are gathered here today, to really hear from a diverse set of actors, both government and non-party stakeholders, on what are the actions that are already on the way, what are the gaps that still remain, and how can we promote collaboration to drive forward action from Cali to Baku and to Belém on how to scale nature finance. And with this brief introduction, I'd like to now ask somebody who is no stranger to innovative financing, the high-level champion from COP27, a mentor to many of us here in this room, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, United Nations Special Envoy on Financing the 2030 Agenda. Dr. Mahmoud, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you so much. And it's great to sit here, and many thanks for the generous introductory remarks and introducing me in that way that may have raised expectations beyond what I'm going to deliver in a few minutes. But before I start, I'd like to recognize everyone around this table for those who have been working hard, especially the champions and their team. And why don't you join me with a round of applause to recognize their great efforts behind the scene, and especially our great sister here, Razan, and Nigar, and all of those people who have been working hard in exceptional circumstances. And for those who are going to be doing this job from Brazil, I think Nigel, Manuel, Razan, Gonzalo, and others will tell them that they will be facing even more interesting times, and will be behind them in every possible way. And we know what's given, that we are not on the right track. And the issue when it comes to nature and biodiversity, we don't really have the same North Star as we do in the emissions. But there are many reports, including the recent report by UNEP on the gap, that are, and other reports, they are telling us that even if we are doubling the efforts of adaptation finance, we are only going to bridge no more than 5% of the needed finance. And if we are going to be relying just on public sources of funding, we are not going to be reaching the targets for protection, for the protection of nature and biodiversity. And yes, there have been a great deal of work, as I mentioned, few of them, and she has been very much behind many. The establishment of the Cali Fund, the creation of permanent indigenous body, the progress, and I'm sitting here to someone who did a lot in the indigenous groups and its community. There is some good work as well in digital sequence information using data and science, advancements in marine and coastal biodiversity, enhanced focus on biodiversity and climate change. And then we see the leaders from the London Climate Week to the Hamburg Climate Week from government saying that we cannot really work in silos. Congratulations for this late realization of common sense, that climate needs to speak to development and needs to speak to nature. And if we are in doubt, we are very much limited in the finance and the technological resources. So even if you are just happy working on your own in silos, not to speak with anyone but those who are in your specialized vertical practice, there will no resources to support this kind of work. And there is a great deal of complementarity, and there is a great deal of scale on getting nature close to development and both to climate. I think if there had been great effort of COP27 is basically to establish that climate action is development action. Razan and her colleagues and the presidency of COP28 in the Emirates managed to establish the links between nature, biodiversity, and the role of the indigenous groups with the rest of the story I just mentioned, development and climate. But how can we deal with the kind of constraints? I think, as it happened before, when we see tough global environment and tough geopolitics, high risk, I would say those who have been complaining about uncertainty, I can tell them that you cannot complain about uncertainty anymore. It's a world of high risk, so enjoy it, because we know the tools on how to deal with that. We are going to see it, especially from some sort of jurisdictions through the leadership, as very much how to factor in the abnormal risks and the high risks. But we have tools to deal with that. Having said that, we need to be very practical, more on regionalization. I'm very pleased that many of these initiatives, while they will end up to be global, but they are very much focusing on local communities, national level with regional dimension. And if they are following international standards, we can get back again to this kind of global movement. I'm not talking regionalization, localization, to escape from the type of work that we have to be engaged in at the global level, but basically more local solutions and more regional solutions based on international standards. So what can we do more? It's great that we have Brazil adequately represented with us, and I'll come to that in less than 2 minutes. But some changes in the economic rules of engagement are needed. And for those of you who've been at ANGA and the discussions on the Pact of the Future, we know that part of the Pact, in addition to the different dimensions of the work on the SDGs, nature, peace, future of youth, and dealing with challenges and opportunities in digitalization and dealing with the global financial architecture, there was something that had been agreed upon in silence, which is nice, that we need to have a new metric to measure the performance of economies, that we need to go beyond the GDP. And let me quote the Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Antonio Guterres, when he said, in our common agenda report, we need to realize that GDP rises when there is overfishing, cutting of forests, or burning of fossil fuels. We are destroying nature, but we count it as an increase in wealth. This is the way that economists and statisticians do. This is an effort. It's a value by minus, but there was some sort of addition in the work, so this is counted as plus. So we need to factor in matters related to nature and what we are adding to assets and what we are taking off the assets and how much assets we are making stranded as well when we have to calculate our GDP. And this is going to be a game changer, especially if we are taking it from the GDP at the national level to the contribution of sectors and local contributions as well. And with the same metric, we can really have incentives for the private sector to change their behavior. If you do that, perhaps the figure of contribution of private sector to nature, finance, and biodiversity, and we're in doubt really, back 2 years when we had that meeting at the Global Center of Adaptation in Holland, when they said the contribution doesn't exceed 3% and it cannot go south. Unfortunately, it went south by 0.5%. The contribution of the private sector had declined. So there are lots of things here about incentives, about packaging, about getting these issues related to development, to climate, to matters related to nature and biodiversity closer. So very specifically here, and again, happy to see colleagues from Brazil with us. We are anticipating still a lot from the summit in the G20 and more as well from Brazil to South Africa, with the Global South continuing the leadership on shaping up the agenda. So the G20, there is a great opportunity to advance this agenda through the Sustainable Finance Working Group and their Sustainable Finance Roadmap, and the great initiative by President Lula, especially on forests, and how to get this kind of partnership for forests with the involvement of top brains and deep pockets at the same time to support the work. Let me recognize as well the excellent work by WWF that has published a global roadmap for nature positive economy, which sets out an agenda for action to work towards nature positive economy by outlining areas of reform required in the economic rules, from regulations to policy incentives to opportunities and building pipelines. Happy as well with the great leadership of the champions, including Razan and Nigar, to continue the work on the regional pipeline of bankable and investable project that we started with Nigel 2 years ago in Addis, and I'm happy to see more than 35% of the projects are projects on nature-related activities with local impact, and SDGs filters have been applied, and these projects pass their filters, these filters nicely. Razan mentioned the good work on the swaps and the 1 billion in Salvador. My good friends at the IMF are now joining the team of providing good support by telling you, don't stop at the transaction, put a framework, because we cannot just go bespoke, but we need to have these transactions at scale. Salvador is great news. Seychelles before great news. Belize is another, but we need to have a system of pipeline regulatory framework linked to macroeconomic reforms. And if the super conservative friends of the IMF, that I have the pleasure of working with them for 40 years, and with them for more than 20, I would like to say that there could be some good practical news coming from the macro side. World Bank will have no problem with that. IDB, other NDBs will be even more forthcoming when it comes to these swaps as solutions. Very final thing, a good message from colleagues who are working hard in another innovative way by link and very much linked to what I just said on the Task Force on Credit Enhancement for Sustainability Linked Sovereign Finance. So the Task Force on Credit Enhancement for Sustainability Linked Sovereign Finance launched at COP28, brought together NDBs, DFIs to focus on this important topic, and COP29 welcomed the development of voluntary principles for scaling sustainability-linked instruments for this task force. The task force has identified sustainability, accountability, and effectiveness, impact and governance with a gift of capacity building for those who need it. And with this practical contribution, we hope that these kind of different approaches in dealing with nature, linking it to development and climate, will enhance the participation of the private sector and improve the regulatory structure, including with the financial sector and the banks, and see better toolkit coming from the NDBs. And I'd like to recognize again my friends at the World Bank and the IDB for advancing top-notch solutions when it comes to de-risking tools, especially when it comes to nature. So challenges are there, interesting times are ahead, but there is the determination, the great leadership, and many solutions that could be mobilized and enhanced. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've now finished the part of the session where we're talking at you, and really encourage now talking together and with you. And we'd like to now hear interventions from the floor. And our first intervention, I'm very honored to invite Her Excellency Minister Marina Silva, Minister of Environment and Climate Change from Brazil. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Obrigada, querida Razan. Boa tarde a todas as pessoas que se encontram nesse espaço. É uma grande satisfação estar aqui neste evento de relevância para o clima e a biodiversidade. No caminho de Cali a Belém, o Brasil defende a coordenação dos esforços em clima, biodiversidade e desertificação, pois essas agendas se reforçam mutuamente. O combate à desertificação contribui diretamente para a preservação da biodiversidade e a mitigação climática e, ao mesmo tempo, a conservação de ecossistemas fortalece a resiliência e previne a desertificação da terra. Portanto, estamos falando de sinergia entre as 3 convenções que nasceram no Rio de Janeiro, no meu país. Para que a COP30 seja bem-sucedida, a COP29 precisa estabelecer bases sólidas, especialmente no que diz respeito à nova meta quantificada global de finanças. Os meios de implementação serão cruciais para que países em desenvolvimento possam financiar ações de adaptação, mitigação e conservação. É nossa responsabilidade coletiva assegurar o cumprimento dos compromissos financeiros que assumimos para poder fazer o enfrentamento da perda de biodiversidade e desertificação. O Brasil tem metas claras. Buscamos o desmatamento zero até 2030. Entre agosto de 2023 e julho de 2024, o desmatamento na Amazônia caiu 30,6%, a menor taxa em 15 anos. No Cerrado, houve uma redução de 25,7%, revertendo 5 anos consecutivos de alta. Com esses resultados, evitamos a emissão de mais de 400 milhões de toneladas de CO2, uma contribuição superior as emissões anuais de alguns países. Reafirmamos nosso compromisso com a conservação, com a Convenção do Rio, inclusive o Acordo de Paris. Hoje, entregaremos ao secretário executivo da UNFCCC a versão completa da NDC brasileira, que reflete nossa visão para 2035. Posso dizer, trata-se de uma NDC altamente ambiciosa e comprometida com a missão 1.5. Estamos também finalizando nossa estratégia e plano de ação nacional para a biodiversidade, essencial para monitorar o progresso das ações de conservação e uso sustentável da biodiversidade, conforme discutido na COP16 da CDB em Cali. Nós temos cada vez mais que atuar no sentido de conservar a biodiversidade, restaurar o que foi perdido e, ao mesmo tempo, ter a sabedoria de fazer o uso sustentável dessa imensa riqueza. Além disso, o Fundo Florestas Tropicais para Sempre, TFFF, surge como uma iniciativa vital e a bioeconomia está no centro de uma nova visão de desenvolvimento. É fundamental que, no contexto de tudo que está acontecendo no mundo, possamos trabalhar para criar um novo ciclo de prosperidade. Recentemente, no G20, avançamos com a aprovação dos princípios de alto nível em biodiversidade, promovendo o desenvolvimento sustentável que integra ciência e conhecimento tradicional, valoriza os povos indígenas e as comunidades locais e combate a pobreza, a desigualdade e a fome. A COP30 será uma oportunidade histórica para consolidar essas agendas e mostrar que é possível alinhar esforços para o clima e a biodiversidade. Em Belém, contamos com o apoio da comunidade internacional para transformar compromissos em resultados concretos, com foco no bem-estar das gerações presentes e futuras. O Brasil está pronto para liderar e colaborar, e contamos com todos para que essa jornada seja um marco na construção de um futuro sustentável e inclusivo. Muito obrigada.
These are the type of solid and consistent policy intervention that non-party stakeholders hope to continuously receive from government so that we can signal to the market to respond and to enhance finance flows to where it's more needed. Thank you, Minister. I'd like to invite His Excellency Minister Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Canada. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I can honestly tell all of you that my proudest moment as Environment and Climate Change Minister for Canada was when we hosted COP15 under the Chinese presidency. And together, governments, NGOs, Indigenous peoples, businesses, we came to an historic agreement. Now remember that 6 months before the event, we didn't even know if we would be able to hold it, let alone come to this historic agreement together. And therefore, it is together that we have to continue moving forward with the implementation of this historic agreement. I'd like to take a minute to thank my friend, Minister Da Silva, for her intervention, but more so for the incredible and inspiring work that your government is doing in the Amazon. And like Brazil, Canada is blessed with vast forests, fresh water, marshlands, as well, obviously, as the North, which is so important to our Inuit population. But like all of our countries, Canada is seeing the devastating impacts of climate change on our natural habitat. We've seen record forest fires, especially in the north, which are affecting indigenous nations first and foremost. So what must we do to live up to the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Agreement? And what tools do we need to implement it? Well, the science is clear, and we know that we have to protect at least 30% of our lands, water, and in Canada we had ice by 2030 for a livable planet, which is why after COP15 we launched a Nature's Champions network to accelerate the implementation of the GBF, which we're very proud to co-chair with China. And we encourage all of those of you that haven't joined it to do so. And I want to also congratulate the government of Colombia and Mr. Mohamed for the success that we were able to achieve at COP16 with a very positive outcome on the creation of a permanent body for Indigenous peoples. This is something that Canada worked very hard alongside our Indigenous nations, because as we all know, most of the intact lands around the world and the world's biodiversity is found on Indigenous territory. So they have to be at the heart of what we do together to protect nature. And in Canada, it is obviously about protecting nature, but it is also about reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. They are the guardians of the land. And together with them, we have undertaken the country's most important conservation campaign in our history. Bit by bit, we are moving the needle to get to our 2030 target. And one of the tools we've developed is called Projects for Permanence, which is a model that puts Indigenous peoples at the heart of these projects alongside governments, private donors, and philanthropies. Some of you may recall that in Montreal, Prime Minister Trudeau announced $800 million for 4 large-scale protected areas. And let me give you an example of one of them, which will come to a conclusion in the coming days. It's a project in the Northwest Territories, so the northern part of our country, with 23 Indigenous nations, as well as the local government. It's more than a $400 million project that will protect 1 million square kilometer of land, so roughly 4 times the size of the United Kingdom. So we believe that this is the type of tools we need that can be used certainly in our country, but around the world, to build a net positive economy and put nature financial at the heart of what we do. We have just launched our taxonomy principles in Canada to guide investors away from harmful subsidies. Canada is so far the only G20 country that has eliminated its fossil fuel subsidies, as all of the G20 committed to do by 2025. And we support the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatments. Unfortunately, COP16 did fall short on nature, but we want to work with you, with the Secretariat, to make sure that we can continue implementing these elements, and especially the one on nature financing, to support efforts from low and middle income countries in their endeavor to protect their nature. There are many strong partners in the room to help us lead this work, so I want to thank all of you for what you do. Your partnership is essential to achieve our goal, and Canada is here to support you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. May I please invite Mr. Jordan Schwartz, Executive Vice President from the Inter-American Development Bank. Mr. Jordan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's such a great pleasure to be here. I thought as this year, the Inter-American Development Bank has had the privilege of coordinating the multilateral development bank heads, which is not an easy feat for one regional development bank to do. It's been sort of an extraordinary year of collaboration and coordination for those of us who have spent many years working in the multilateral development space, to see the level of commitment specific to the topics that are being addressed today, being brought forward by the multilaterals, being addressed at the G20 as well. And I think maybe importantly being articulated in the context of COP16 and here as well, is really quite moving. As you know, MDBs have committed to the joint statement on nature, people, and planet, and the global biodiversity framework. But the viewpoint note that the multilateral development banks put forward this year had 16 concrete deliverables, including tracking nature finance and aligning biodiversity KPIs, which were sort of explicitly part of the monitoring, measurement, and mainstreaming of biodiversity requirements in the joint statement. As for the IDB, we've embedded biodiversity into country strategies, and we've established a dedicated biodiversity and natural capital unit to drive nature positive development. For the first time now, we're actually able to track our levels of financing, both from the public sector sides and the private sector sides, on nature. And according to an MDB agreed methodology, we think this is the direction that all the multilaterals are moving in. So I can tell you that I can report that we've tracked for the past year, $2 billion in nature financing, 1.3 billion from our public sector side and $700 million from our private sector side, which represents almost 15% of our financing. So just a little bit of our own accounting, which is maybe the first step forward to actually being able to increase and to help close the financing gap that Mahmoud described so eloquently at the beginning of the session. Very quickly, some of the steps that we're taking in mainstreaming biodiversity. And again, this is probably a reflection of the kinds of actions that the multilateral development bank community is doing overall. By integrating biodiversity into national policies, we're helping countries align their efforts with global frameworks like the Paris Agreement, and regionally working with finance ministers on budget tagging and incentives to incorporate biodiversity into fiscal policy. Mahmoud mentioned debt for nature swaps. We have been using both policy lending and increasingly policy guarantees in order to bring to market debt for nature swaps. We've done this in Bahamas, in Ecuador, in Barbados, getting verifiable commitments and structuring the ability to build and maintain marine reserves, to protect the Galapagos Islands in the case of Ecuador, to build water resilience, and for our next upcoming swap in Ecuador to address sustainability in the Amazon in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. So that's just a little bit of an idea of where we're going with debt for nature swaps. We've helped to structure an Amazonia bond that can fund sustainable development across the Amazon, the 8 countries of the Amazon, with a standardized bond structure, with the use of funds to reduce poverty, prevent deforestation, and support sustainable growth. We also have a regional Jaguar Impact Initiative aimed at piloting outcomes-based financing for biodiversity conservation, starting with Colombia. I think we understand the impetus to give voice to local and regional ecosystem challenges so that in a way that they do not get swamped by the global climate discussions, particularly around mitigation, the energy transition. But that said, the climate-nature nexus is immutable. It certainly is in Latin America and the Caribbean, where deforestation makes droughts and flooding worse, and where coral reef loss and mangrove depletion, to name a couple of examples, leave coasts more vulnerable to storms. I believe that COP30, which will be in an off year for the biodiversity COP, will be by necessity bringing back together the nexus of climate and that of natural capital. It will be an opportunity to unite around the Amazon as an example of a climate-nature nexus that can drive countries to protect biodiversity and the communities that are part of that ecosystem while delivering climate targets in the face of increasing incidents of natural disasters. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I please invite His Excellency, the Honorable Minister Amos Lugulubi, Minister of State of Planning from the Republic of Uganda. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. My comments will center on the value of synergetic mobilization of climate and nature finance and the core benefits of synergized climate and nature finance. On the value of synergetic mobilization of climate and nature finance. Synergetic mobilization of climate and nature finance presents a significant opportunity for all of us to maximize environmental and economic outcomes, while also producing more holistic and efficient use of resources. Climate finance typically targets mitigation and adaptation measures to reduce greenhouse emissions and address climate impacts, whereas nature finance is dedicated to biodiversity conservation, ecosystem restoration, and sustained land use practices. And Uganda is typically involved in that particular area. Mobilizing these funds together can unlock core benefits, foster cost-effective solutions, and enhance accountability, especially in the context of achieving sustainable development goals. The core benefits of synergized climate and nature finance. Number one, in addition to enhanced environment, the synergetic mobilization of resources will improve economic efficiency and resource allocation, which allows for better resource allocation, reducing redundancy, and increasing the cost effectiveness of investments. Number two, by aligning climate and nature objectives, finance can target dual impact projects that address both climate and ecosystem needs, potentially attracting a broader range of public and private investors. Point number three, it reduces competition between sectors and fosters the united investment strategy, driving down overall costs. Point number four, strengthen social and economic benefit projects that bridge climate and nature finance tend to have a higher social impact due to their combined approach to environmental and livelihood improvements. For example, agroforestry initiatives can improve food security, create jobs, support carbon sequestration, and preserve biodiversity. Such projects promote community resilience, reducing poverty, and creating sustainable economic opportunities that can uplift communities. On the role of the coalition of finance ministers for climate action in advancing synergies between climate and nature finance. This coalition of financial ministers for climate action emphasizes synergies between climate and nature finance, which are essential for advancing sustainable development and addressing intertwined environmental and economic challenges. As the climate and biodiversity crises become increasingly urgent, the integration of climate and nature finance offers a strategic approach for cost-effective, impactful, and sustainable solutions. Last month, the coalition at its 12th meeting in Washington approved a climate action, which is a vehicle for the coalition to champion these synergies on a global scale. The coalition of financial ministers for climate action supports information exchange and best practices. The platform offers valuable venue for finance ministries to share knowledge, tools, and successful examples of integrated climate and nature finance. This way, the coalition of finance ministers can guide member countries in adopting best practices and developing tailored approaches to achieve effective climate-nature synergies. Uganda is the incoming chair of the coalition, and given the fact that it's a country that is heavily endowed in biodiversity and nature, and at the same time very vulnerable to climate change shocks, this synergetic approach will be one of the key actions that will be advocated for, and we call for your support and collaboration. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Next, I'd like to invite my sister, Ms. Hindu Ibrahim, Chair of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, to highlight the importance of direct access to finance for Indigenous peoples. Hindu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sister Razan, and hi, everyone. Finally, what Indigenous peoples are calling for, it's happening. We never divided biodiversity or climate or land. It's all the same when we talk in the reality. And while we are moving to the real implementations to protect our planet and his peoples, so this is really the right way. And you all contributed a lot. And we come from Cali when we really celebrate the subsidiary body of Indigenous peoples, thanks to everyone participations. And of course, we are here where we already negotiating and discussing about the Indigenous Peoples Platform. We are going to Riyadh, where we discuss around land. So this year is so critical, but we have to move to the implementation, and that's why this roundtable is so important for the finance. So Indigenous peoples receiving so little, but let's say nature receiving very little. Because we all know data is outside, I'm not inventing them. 35 trillion going to war, 7 trillion going to fossil fuel, only less than 1 going to nature. So the money is there, just so it cannot fund the subsidy. It have to be thorough and fund the nature and protect the nature. Who are the guardian of the nature? Of course, Indigenous peoples. We protect 80% of the world's biodiversity, and you recognize our leadership in all those conventions. So that's why we worked very hard to change the way. Now we wanted to have the direct access finance. We are not talking about give them 100,000, then that will be done. If we manage 80% of the world's biodiversity, that means we can manage billion and trillion to protect the nature. So you have to build the trust into the multilateral finance to put the real money in the tables and to put the exact money that can go to the Indigenous peoples. And we need also to change the policies, coherence. Then the NDSAP, NDC, LDN can come together, because at the national level implementation, they are one. In our land as Indigenous peoples, they are one. And then for that, we work since the COP28 with the help of my sister Razan here in the COP28 to come together through all the different COP presidencies to work on what the meaning of the direct access finance and how we can land it. So the first one is we want to have the finance without intermediaries or choosing intermediary by Indigenous peoples who can be in our hand. And then we can land it in the COP30 with a second pledge that I'm calling to everyone here around the table and outside, from the private, philanthropic, from the public funding, to make the real pledge that can protect the nature. If you are sick, you go to the doctor, you do not ask the price of the medicine. You do not ask how much that you are going to pay to get healed. So don't ask how much that you have to put in the direct access finance for the doctors of the nature. Put the price of your health and the price of the future of your children. So then in the COP30, we can land it in a right place and celebrate it all. And let's see, coming years, I think we will fix it, because we wanted to drive you in a safe place. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Mr. Yutaka Matsusawa, Vice Minister of Global Environmental Affairs from Japan. Vice Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to talk about 2 points: synergies between climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and sustainable development. Number one. And second, the private sector's actions and private finance. Mobilization of private sector's actions and finance is critical. First, regarding the synergies, Japan has been advocating the importance of promoting synergies such as by proposing the resolution on promoting synergies adopted at UNEA 6 and endorsing the joint statement on climate, nature, and people. Japan will strongly promote and support the implementation of this UNEA resolution. At CBD COP16, which I also took part in, it was agreed to identify and maximize synergies between biodiversity and climate actions and strengthen coordination with the UNFCCC and CBD, of course. And as Madam Minister Silva mentioned, this year we have 3 COPs, and first CBD COP and CBD COP luckily agreed the synergies between conventions, and now at COP29 we can receive message from CBD, then we will agree something here, and we will send message to the desertification COP. So we will see the strengthening of the synergies between 3 conventions at least. Second one is the private sector's actions and finance. TNFD framework matters. Companies will disclose their nature-related risks, opportunities, ambitions, and other financial issues. Financial sector, of course, will assess these disclosed information by companies. Nature-based solution by companies will be backed by financial sector. Private finance can be mobilized with actions. And Japan announced a contribution of approximately $500,000 to TNFD on the occasion of CBD COP16 to enhance TNFD's activities. I will introduce a few initiatives in Japan aimed at mobilizing resources from the private sector. The first is the formulation of domestic guidelines for green bonds and other instruments. By putting together and sharing concrete examples of green projects, including those in the nature field, we will further encourage efforts in the private sector, such as those of financial institutions. The second is the formulation of transition strategy toward nature-positive economies. These strategies aim to support companies to disclose information and proceed with nature-positive initiatives, and as a result, increase private sector funding for biodiversity. Finally, there is a trial issuance of support certificates for supporters of OECM, conservation management in Japan. These certificates are intended to be used for TNFD disclosures, investors' relations, and so on. Everybody, let's work together to promote integrated discussions on climate and biodiversity, looking ahead to COP13 in Belém next year and UNEA 7 after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Minister, from your mouth to God's ears. And in our hands, really. So we have quite a few more interventions. So if I may ask you to limit your interventions to 3 minutes, that would be very helpful to make sure that we hear from most of those who have asked for the floor. Next, I have Mr. Alain Beauvillier, Director for Strategy, Policy and Innovation from the Green Climate Fund. Mr. Alain, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The Green Climate Fund is the largest multilateral climate fund And despite GCF mandates being primarily focused on climate change mitigation and adaptation, the GCF plays an important role in financing biodiversity. Out of a total portfolio of $16 billion, about 5.4 billion are invested in more than 170 projects targeting nature. Thanks to its full range of financial instruments, including grants, concessional loans, equity, and guarantees, the GCF is designed to leverage both public and private finance at scale. The GCF is the only multilateral climate fund that partners directly with the private sector, which is actually the right approach to reach the scale needed to mitigate risk and to broaden market access in the long term. The GCF has also financed some of the most innovative instruments in nature-based solutions, including parametric insurance, blue carbon, green bonds, and most recently, a debt swap in Barbados alongside the European Investment Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. GCF flexible and risk-tolerant approach allows it to support high-impact projects that might be perceived sometimes as too risky for traditional investors, providing critical financing for both biodiversity and climate outcome. In October this year, the GCF also became one of the very few permanent sources of REDD+ results-based payment. This is a very important milestone as it fully integrates REDD+ result-based payment into GCF programming cycle. This open-ended offer significantly reduces the competition among countries for REDD+ resources, allowing countries with more limited capacity to still access the resources without having to worry that others may get them first. Beyond GCF finance, this new policy also sends a very strong signal to the entire ecosystem, encouraging public and private sources alike to invest in all phases of REDD+. Let me give you 3 very short examples of GCF projects that demonstrate how nature-based solutions can be integrated into national and regional climate action framework. First, the Amazon Bioeconomy Fund is an initiative aiming to promote sustainable bioeconomic practices in the Amazon region by supporting local businesses that conserve biodiversity and provide alternative income sources to deforestation-linked activities. Second, the Blue Halo project we deploy in Indonesia, aiming at restoring and protecting marine habitats by implementing sustainable fishing practices and marine conservation measures. The third one is the Global Fund for Coral Reliefs. The GCF anchors $125 million that committed as a first loss investor. This fund mobilized both public and private finance for a sustainable blue economy project, a key example of how blended finance can address ecosystem resilience and support local livelihood. In conclusion, the GCF plays and will continue to play a unique role in catalyzing finance for nature thanks to our direct engagement in nature projects, our diverse portfolio of innovative instruments, and our full alignment with global biodiversity and climate frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite Mr. Rick Duke, Deputy Special Envoy for Climate from the United States of America?
Thank you. And as we heard from Her Excellency Al-Mubarak at the top, this agenda of dealing with halting and reversing deforestation can really deliver a third of the abatement that we need by 2030. And that's why it's one of 3 things we need to do to keep 1.5 degrees C within reach. Of course, we need global energy transition by 2050. We also need to cut non-CO2 superpollutants like methane as the climate emergency brake. Those greenhouse gases are causing over half of current climate change, and we need to address them quickly. And we have to address this agenda of halting and reversing deforestation. And by the way, some of the solutions that we've heard about today can help with both the non-CO2 methane problem and the forest agenda through measures like agroforestry, as we heard from the minister from Uganda, and agricultural productivity, which can help indigenous and local communities and help with rural livelihoods while also reducing pressures on deforestation and cutting things like methane pollution. So lots of co-benefits, lots of opportunities, and much to do. As we heard from Madame Ibrahim, there isn't enough happening yet. We need to put more resourcing into this. And as we heard from multiple interveners, including a colleague from Japan, we need to have the private sector in the forefront of delivering that investment in these solutions. And in recent years, we've seen that multilateral development banks, bilateral development finance institutions have been innovating on measures like innovative debt financing mechanisms to mobilize that finance that we need for climate and nature. But there are a lot of barriers, a lot of bottlenecks that we're familiar with. One of them is the access needed to credit enhancements, which can de-risk these investments and catalyze more private sector investment. Our U.S. Development Finance Corporation is working with the IDB on a task force on these credit enhancements, including standardizing what kind of practices make a difference. We're also working on a range of other innovative tools, and I want to just give you a quick sense of some of them. An example is that our Development Finance Corporation in the United States is an investor in a $1 billion scale land restoration project in the Cerrado biome in Brazil. It's already restored a massive area, 7 times the size of Washington, D.C., and it's moving ahead. Beyond that, we see great opportunity to scale this solution as one of the ways to support rural livelihoods, economic development, and halt and reverse deforestation. We've also been working on a variety of debt for nature models with sovereign debt via the Tropical Forests and Coral Reef Conservation Act, and with Development Finance Corporation guarantees supporting deals involving privately held debt. And I also want to just note that we've worked on both the supply and the demand for high integrity forest carbon credits through the Public-Private LEAF Coalition and initiatives that support this work, such as the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility and the Biocarbon Fund Initiative for Sustainable Forest Landscapes. This is something which is getting to scale. And I want to note that just in recent weeks, we've had the state of Pará, that of course will be hosting COP30 in Belém, come forward with a nearly $200 million initial transaction under the LEAF approach with high integrity, verifiable reductions in deforestation, rewarded appropriately in order to support the work required to make that possible. And we see this scaling into the billions with the right work by all of us around the table and others beyond. Finally, I just want to note that the United States is serving on the steering committee for designing the Tropical Forest Forever facility. We do need a way to not only end deforestation and support that work through mechanisms like LEAF, but also sustain those forests indefinitely and provide appropriate support to do so. So we encourage everyone to roll up their sleeves and do more quickly. And I just want to note that it is inspirational and encouraging and should give us all courage that Brazil has achieved so much progress in so little time. It shows how quickly we can deliver these mitigation benefits when governments, with international support, with private sector investment support, with everyone shoulder to the wheel, can get the job done on halting and reversing deforestation. And so we have to just keep going on a global basis in all tropical forest countries to complete the work. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Mr. Pekka Moran, Special Representative from the Prime Minister's Office from the Republic of Finland.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to continue the discussions we had in Cali a few weeks back. Finland has been leading the work of the Coalition of Finance Ministers on Nature workstream with UK. So in follow-up to what the incoming co-chair Uganda said, I'm going to explain a bit what we have done. The coalition and the finance ministers are not looking into the envelopes, the financing envelopes at all. We are thinking of ways of how to change the way economic, fiscal, and financial policies are being conducted. So it's a pretty comprehensive effort, systemic change in the way the economic policy is being affirmed. I would like to make 3 points and then point on next steps on what we do. First is, and I want to make this point also in the context of the negotiations that are undergoing and took place in Cali, that there is a broadly lack of awareness on the economic and fiscal financial context of the climate and nature policies. So we're trying to raise awareness of that and help also ourselves to understand what needs to be done. The second point is that there are very difficult technical and political matters to solve, and it takes a quite deep dive into the substance. That's why we need institutional partners like IDB and others. We have in the coalition 30 partners, and we would like to expand that partnerships to more to the nature side in the future. And the political aspects are extremely important because our job is to actually help finance ministers and prime ministers and decision makers to make progress. So we need to go into details and the political economic challenges that are there. I give a few examples. For example, subsidy policy. It's extremely important that when we show these ambitious numbers, that we understand what it takes to actually deal with these subsidies. It's also communication matter. We need to explain investors and communicate how that is done. It's a very complex thing to do and requires a lot of technical work and data. So communication there is key. And my final point is about governance, because the fact is that only a few countries today have economic, fiscal, financial policy integrated into the climate nature policies. And there are not many, but we are on the right track. I think many countries are doing it, and that is the right way to do it. But a lot of work to do. Last point I want to make in the next step. We have produced this guidebook, 250 pages, about what it takes to integrate climate into economic, fiscal, and financial policies. It's on the website of the coalition. Do have a look. And I'm also raising it because we are going to update that guidebook to be more consider more the nature angle and nature climate nexus. So we expect to do that before end of next year. So we will also be calling for collaboration from partners, possibly also some around this table. So thank you very much, and thanks for the excellent discussion.
I'd like to invite Ms. Irene Heemsker from the European Central Bank. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. Pleasure to be here with you today. If you destroy nature, you destroy the economy. And I think this is all known in this room, but often overlooked outside. And this is something we need to work on. And this is exactly what we're doing at the ECB. So at the ECB last year, we did a study we looked at 4.2 million companies in Europe. How dependent are they on nature services, like water, fresh air, and all the other services that nature provides us for free? We found that over 70% of these companies are highly dependent on nature. We also looked into the loans of banks into those companies. We found that 70% of the loans of banks are invested in companies that are highly dependent on nature. We also know that nature is heavily degrading at a very fast pace. So this is a risk, and we all need to be aware of because it fits our mandate. It impacts inflation, raises prices, and it leads to risks. Why is it important for what we're talking about now, today, on allocating financial flows to nature? If you know the risk, you also see more the value of what you have to lose. On the flip side of that, I hope that it will redirect financial flows more towards preserving nature than to destroying it. The ECB is not the only central bank who works on this. I'm very pleased to say that we're together with 141 central banks around the globe, united in a network for greening the financial system. Central banks and supervisors from small island states, large economies, fossil fuel companies, high biodiversity countries, high biodiversity rich countries. So a really diverse group. And I want to highlight one publication we did last year, or this summer even. It's a conceptual framework to guide actions by central banks and supervisors. And here we really set out the transmission channels. And I think this really relates to the systematic approach that Pekka just mentioned. Why, if the coffee crops don't grow in a certain place in the area, how will it eventually end up at the balance sheets of banks? So this whole systematic approach and the transmission channels, this is in it. It also provides guidance for central banks and supervisors to assess the risk from a macroeconomic perspective and also the prudential side for the banks do. And also interested for you here today, also there's a chapter on climate and nature nexus, because this is what we're talking about today. How can we address it as a twin crisis and do work on that? And one of the questions that we're discussing today as well on like what are the next steps and the progress needed and collaboration needed in which spaces? Well, first, central banks and supervisors have to act, right? We have to do our job. We have put out this guidance document. Let's do our job and make sure that we know where the impact on our economies come from, know where the risk will materialize. Secondly, data and disclosures, and I really want to applaud the chair here today of the great work that the TNFD is doing at this front. More data on nature is really key to have the more insight in the risks, more insight on also the opportunities. Lastly, and that's the interdisciplinary approach, and I think this is also a testament of the work that's being done today, bringing these people together. So I started with, if you destroy nature, you destroy our economies. I think I want to end, if you preserve nature, you preserve our life and also our economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Irene, for putting it so succinctly and clearly, and really for a great call to action for much more collaborative work, and really to try to understand where the gaps and challenges are. Why aren't we investing in nature at the scale and speed that is required? And to answer this question, I'm going to call on the World Bank. Can I please ask Ms. Svetlana Klimenko to take the floor? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Razan, I was just thinking what a huge difference we have seen over the last 2 years when it comes to discussion of the nature-based solutions and overall the role of nature in the context of development. And I would like to really acknowledge your role, the role that you have played through your COP, which you have led last year, which elevated this topic, as well as the role which was played by the government of Brazil. Minister left, but Maria, who has done a great job in shepherding this topic through the finance track. I'm getting to the finance question, which was absolutely instrumental in helping people to understand and comprehend this topic. Now, how do we get from just acknowledging that nature is important into mobilizing funding? It's not an easy question. In my personal view, one of the reasons as to why we have focused so much on energy transition versus nature is because it is just easier to comprehend. We build something, we know how to destroy this and to build something else. How does one comprehend nature? And how does one find money to protect nature? So I will mention just 2 areas where I think we could focus our efforts to make the difference. First, to quote Mike Bloomberg, what can be measured can be managed. So we need to find a way to assess and mainstream both risks and opportunities related to nature in the way our global financial system functions. A lot has been said about this. TNFD is doing a great job. ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, has paved the way into designing standards that then can be used by both private sector and public sector in recognizing risks and opportunities. I will stress both risks and opportunities related to climate and nature. Once we will have this, once we will have numbers, very concrete numbers, it will be much easier to convince different stakeholders to act together. Second, area is financial innovation, because let us be honest, there are some parts of nature finance which are not yet served by the existing financial sources. I love private capital. I have worked for many years on private capital mobilization. They simply are not well equipped to bring money to such areas as forest conservation, for example, which is why we are working with the government of Brazil on the Tropical Forest Forever facility, because we see this as the unique mechanism that can use different tools, including markets, to mobilize funding to the area which is currently hugely underserved. So mainstreaming the numbers, the measurements of risks and opportunities into the markets, while also focusing on innovation, because without this kind of drastic innovation, we will not be able to get where we need to be. So thank you very much again.
Can I please invite Mr. Nabil Kadri from the Brazilian Development Fund?
Thanks, Razan. Very nice to be here, and thanks for the invitation. We are a 70-year-old national development bank, and as the Brazilian National Development Bank, BNDES, nature and biodiversity are in the center of our strategies for the Brazilian inclusive development. During COP16 in Cali, we launched a very ambitious statement on nature, and we are the first financial institution to report the contributions to achieve all the 23 goals of Kunming-Montreal framework. Our formal statement includes our commitment to induce a new economy and social development paradigm that has the harmonious relationship between people and nature, recognizing the traditional knowledges. And how to implement this commitment? First of all, we need to be a financial institution committed to the end of the deforestation, using technology to have a free deforestation loan process. At BNDES, every loan are verified with satellite images. Using this kind of technology, we were able to block, since last year, more than 2,000 loans that represent more than $100 million that would be used to people that do deforestation. So we blocked it and we avoid this kind of resources. Second thing is mobilizing resources. And in this way, I would like to highlight the Amazon Fund that is managed by BNDES in partnership with the Ministry of Environment. And in this sense, I would like to congratulate and thanks the governments of Norway, Germany, USA, Japan, UK, Switzerland that are already formal supporters of this initiative. The Amazon Fund is the biggest tropical forest fund in the world, and the commitments made by Denmark, European Union, and Ireland that are in the sense to formalize it to be supported. These resources of the Amazon Fund are used, for example, to launch, as we launched last year during Dubai COP, the Arc of Restoration, a very big initiative coordinated again by BNDES and the Ministry of Environment to convert the deforestation arc of Brazil into a restoration arc, putting private and public projects and investments to recover the forest. This would capture carbon, include communities, and improve the climate resilience of these territories. So, as a development bank, we have a strong belief that there is no chance to achieve the mission 1.5 without nature and people. So we truly believe on it, and we are doing our best to implement actions on it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So given the time constraints, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cap it to the next two speakers on my list, and then I will give the floor to our incredible Minister Susanna Mohammed, who has shepherded the world at COP16, and who has unfortunately also been dealing with existential flood and climate impact in her own country. So thank you for being with us today. With that, I'd like to give the floor first to Ms. Sherry Madeira from CDP, followed by Ms. Maria Mondelez from We Mean Business Coalition. May I ask you to keep your comments as brief as possible?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us here. And as we set our sights on COP30, I think we've all agreed that this needs to be a combined effort, that nature does not stand alone. It is nature and climate together. And at CDP, we're completely behind this integration. And some may say, actually, we're ahead of it with the partners that we have across the ecosystem. CDP has been collecting climate and nature data for 24 years. In the last 15 years, we've been collecting data on water, on forests, on biodiversity. And I'm delighted that our data-driven approach is making a difference. From the first time that corporations report to CDP, within 2 years, their emissions go down by 7 to 10%. Let's think about how it is that we can also make sure that is true for the impacts on nature and on biodiversity. Since we've been collecting this data year on year, I'm very happy to report that this year, out of the 2/3 of the world's market cap that report to CDP, 2/3 of them report on non-climate information. This is nature, this is biodiversity, this is water, plastics, and forests. So we are not starting from a standing start. We have a huge amount of data already that we can draw on, but let's be clear, there is much, much more to do. This is a voluntary path. And voluntary is absolutely compelling, as I've already said, in terms of numbers. But we're also looking forward to working even more closely with the TNFD as one of our key partners in order to drive forward how it is that governments around the world are starting to think about mandatory disclosures on nature. Our partnership with ISSB is a great starting point in order to be able to move that forward. And I'd like to make sure that we don't all come away thinking about the risks only. There are great opportunities here, and we've quantified that as well. So those companies that are reporting to CDP have identified $16.1 trillion worth of opportunity in the climate and nature spaces. Now, unlocking the capital for that, I think there are a lot of those around this table and wider here at COP in Baku who can think about ways to make sure that those identified opportunities are getting the right funds at pace. So we stand as a partner to all of you. We'd like to be able to unlock the use of all of that data and make sure that non-state actors have a firm place. I think that it's a whole of economy approach, Zan. We've spoken about that before, and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just to keep it short, I'll connect with the opportunity. I agree there is a risk, but how can we turn this into a opportunity for business? So we're here at COP. This is a policy setup. Let me summarize the three things that business, we work with business, want to see to advance and invest more in nature. The NDCs, they need to be economy-wide and integrate nature in mitigation and adaptation pathways, and also integrate with the national biodiversity strategy and action plans. It's really important, NDC headlines, but then there's going to be the detail. In that detail, nature needs to be part of it. Second, I'm always embarrassed with this one, subsidy reform. Okay, $1 trillion going to fossil fuel subsidies, 610 going to agriculture subsidies, and 80 billion going to finance linked to deforestation. This is embarrassing. I'm sorry. And I don't have much to say. We need to repurpose those. It is quite obvious, but it's not easy, but come on. It's really embarrassing. Third, clean and consistent frameworks and incentives. So we need to include carbon pricing and also integrate market-based approaches. So there are $4 of public funding versus $1 of private funding going to nature. There's a great opportunity, but we need to provide the framework for business to invest with high integrity guardrails that support the finance to flows to nature. So thank you.
Thank you. Minister Susana?
Thank you, Razan, and hello to everybody. I also joined the colleague from the World Bank in congratulating Razan because she's always persistent in this agenda, and I think that's fabulous, so we can move forward on the process. We have just come from COP16 on biodiversity in Cali, Colombia, and I think there were some outcomes which can help us to unlock part of this very tangled negotiation and discussion on finance that we have in this COP of climate. And it requires a revolution in concepts, because if we keep trying to deal with this crisis under the same conditions, the reality is that nobody's moving economically towards a climate fair economy. And some ideas that may sparkle, just food for thought, came from Cali and could be moving towards COP30 in Brazil. There is a difference in between the energy transition, which actually can be built financially on bankable projects because it's at the core of the economy, it's part of renewing sectors, whole sectors of the economy, where actually you could make financial models that could be repay off in different terms. But when you talk about nature, we're talking about life. Can we make bankable projects around life? And I don't think that's the core of the investment, especially when we are talking that restoring nature is part of human security, is part also of our public common goods, and is part of our common public responsibilities. It also accounts for 20% of the solution towards 2030 in mitigation and avoiding emissions. So it's part of the climate equation, but it's not put into the same importance because it's not bankable. And that's where our system is failing. So there are two key questions. One, they say countries like ours are in debt. Well, they don't say, they are in debt, highly indebted after COVID. But at the same time, we are serving ecological functions without which we could be worse off as a humanity, and you could, the people that know about finance, value how much GDP we are contributing to the economy by keeping certain environmental limits safe. How do we value that so that we can exchange debt for that ecosystem restoration? Not because we're not paying the debt, but because we're going to pay it by restoring nature, which is part of human security for all. And that's one key question of innovation that we should be talking about. And then the second one, how do we make private money public? Well, how we do it in governments, through taxes. So what's happening? That we are just basically privatizing the gains, but the nature depletion is not counted into business. And that what happens, especially global business with global impact. In Cali, we approved the Cali Fund just for one key issue, genetic resources and digital sequences in genetic resources, where actually now private companies are going to give a contribution. Right now it's voluntary contribution so that they can we can finance with that biodiversity. But I think the issue of global taxes and creating public money from private gains to be able to invest publicly in human security to nature restoration should be in this equation. And so we can create a more balanced financial system, a more balanced rules of the game for this crisis that actually will be affecting all of us. And especially there is no economy without, say, planet security, and there's no economy without climate security and without living systems. So I think that should be the basis for our discussion. And I hope we can create a financial architecture that goes around these new rules of the game or this type of thinking so that we can create a political pact that goes beyond these locked negotiations that we're having here
COP in Azerbaijan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Susanna. And with that, what powerful words to end our session with, our intervention portion of this session. We were running over time. We still are running over time. So I'd like to apologize for those who hadn't had the opportunity to give their intervention. But I'd like to hand over a closing to a very dear friend and the originator of the concept of high-level champion, the former COP20 president, and the CBD Action Agenda champion, Mr. Manuel Pulgar Vidal. The floor is yours to very concisely close this session before we are kicked out. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Razan. I will surprise you. I will be extremely short. So, we have recognized the importance of finance for climate and nature. And we know that we have to pave the road from Cali to Belém. Why? 6 reasons in 1 minute. First, to honor our compromise. We have already committed ourselves to fulfill the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework. Second, to achieve our objective and to fulfill with our plans, NDCs, NDSAPs, NAPs, long-term strategies, among some others. Third, to cover the cost of transitions, the energy transition, the industry for climate, but even the transition for biodiversity and nature. Fourth, to dynamize the economy. Finance, it is a key instrument to dynamize the economy as a way that the economy can send back good signal for political decisions and decision making. Fifth, to protect the most vulnerable. We need to have finance to protect people. The most vulnerable, it is key. And then to help and support the system change, that it is so important when it is about climate and nature. Let me say a last phrase. We have seen how instrumental the action agenda is to get those objectives. And let me finish by asking you to join me with a big applause to who have helped a lot to strengthen the action agenda to my friend Razan. Thank you, Razan, for all your effort.
Wonderful. Thank you. We are only 2 minutes over time, so thank you very much for your cooperation, and look forward to our continued collaboration over the duration of this COP. Thank you.
Thank you.